Hello Year 9 and welcome to part 2 of our revision for organisation. Please make sure that you have completed part 1 before moving on to this one. So today we are going to be covering the following areas. So we're going to be looking at the heart and the blood vessels, the blood and coronary heart disease, which is one of the non-communicable diseases we need to know about. We're going to be following the same system as we did in last lesson and will be for the next 2 lessons, where we'll be covering the other parts of the specification, where we'll have some information which I'll go through for revision to add to your mind maps or revision cards or however else you are doing it, and then there will be questions on it. This one has chunked together the 3, so we're actually going to be doing all of the revision part first, and then you'll be able to cover up those notes and then answer the questions. So, starting off with the heart and the structures of the heart. Now, there are certain parts of the heart that we need to know. We need to know about the 2 atria, which are the top chambers. We need to know the ventricles, which are the bottom chambers. We also need to remember that the left and the right are the other way round to what it would be as you're looking at it. Because when we describe the heart, we describe it as though it is inside us. Now, apart from the 4 chambers, we also need to know some of the major blood vessels associated with the heart. And there are 4. 2 of them are veins and 2 of them are arteries. We need to know that the biggest artery, the main artery that leaves the left ventricle, is the aorta. We need to know that the artery that leaves the right ventricle is the pulmonary artery, and that goes to the lungs. The vein that delivers blood into the right atrium, will be the vena cava, which comes from the body, and the blood vessel delivering blood to the left atrium will be the pulmonary vein, where it's returned from the lungs. Now, there are different types of circulatory system, and humans have got a double circulatory system. So that means that there are 2 sides to our heart, the left side and the right side. Some organisms, like fish, have a single circulatory system, so they only have the 2 chambers, and that pumps straight to the gills and then to the rest of the body and then back again. But our one is a double circulatory system because the right hand side will pump blood to the lungs, where it then returns, and then the left hand side pumps it to the body. And you can see that one of the adaptations of the heart is that the left ventricle has got much thicker muscular walls than the right, and this is because it is pumping blood all the way around the body, whereas the right only goes to the lungs, so it does not need to be as thick muscular walls. Now, another blood vessel that we need to know about that comes up a lot in the non-communicable diseases is the coronary arteries. And as you can see in the picture in the green box, the coronary arteries come straight from the aorta, and they are supplying the heart with its blood supply. So the heart does not get the oxygen and glucose and the things that it needs from the blood going inside it. It has its own supply of blood, which is the coronary arteries. Now, these are very rich in oxygen, so that the heart muscle cells will be able to carry out respiration in the mitochondria and ensure that it is constantly contracting. Now, we have something called a natural resting heart rate, and that's controlled by the pacemaker, which is an area or group of cells by the right atrium, and this will control or keep that steady heartbeat that we have. We don't think about our heartbeat, it just happens naturally, and it is the pacemaker that does that. Now, we all have a pacemaker, but you might have heard of something called an artificial pacemaker. And artificial pacemakers are ones that are inserted into the body that will actually stimulate those cells using electric current, just to control any irregular heartbeats. So what I would like you to do now is pause the video, and if we can add to our revision material about the structures of the heart, the double circulatory system, the coronary arteries, and about a pacemaker, the pacemaker. So pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, so we're moving on now, and we're looking at the lungs, which is also very important, obviously, in the circulatory system. So it's the right hand side of the heart, the right ventricle, that pumps the blood via the pulmonary artery to the lungs, where it is there to collect oxygen and deposit the carbon dioxide. And this happens in a structure called an alveolus. So lots of alveoli, one alveolus. And the gas exchange, which is where oxygen goes one way and carbon dioxide goes the other way, the gas exchange happens in these alveoli. So the alveoli are adapted for their function because they have very, very thin walls, and that means diffusion can happen a lot quicker. They're also moist, which also allows diffusion to happen quicker, and they have a very large surface area. So again, maximum diffusion can happen. And oxygen will diffuse from inside the alveoli into the blood, into the red blood cells that are in the blood, and carbon dioxide diffuses out of the blood and into the alveoli. Now that happens via diffusion. It doesn't require energy because there is that concentration gradient. So there'll be more oxygen in the air that you breathe in compared to what is in the blood, and there'll be more carbon dioxide in your blood than there is in the air that we breathe. So can we pause the video now, and can we add into our revision notes the structures of the lungs, including the trachea, which you might have referred to as the windpipe, but it is the trachea, and what is happening in the alveoli. So pause the video and do that now, please. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next one, and in this one we're looking at the blood vessels. We need to know the three main blood vessels, groups of blood vessels, which are the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. And we need to know what the blood pressure is like in there and what adaptations those blood vessels have so they can carry out its function. So we're going to start with the arteries. And you can see from the picture on the arteries that they have got very thick muscular walls. Now that's because blood is under very, very high pressure. So if they have very thin muscular walls, they would just tear, and obviously you would bleed internally. The hole inside blood vessels is called the lumen. And in arteries, because they have a very thick muscular wall, they have a very small lumen, and that keeps the high pressure. We want that high pressure because that forces the blood around the body. Now, arteries always take blood away from the heart. So in primary school, you might have done it as they carry oxygenated blood, but it's not that they carry oxygenated blood because the pulmonary artery does not have oxygenated blood. It's that they take blood away from the heart. The next blood vessel that we need to know about is veins, and they carry blood to the heart. Now, because it's under much lower blood pressure, they have much thinner muscular walls. And because it's under low blood pressure, it also means that they have got valves inside them. Now those valves make sure that the blood doesn't go the wrong way. So if you go upside down, or if you're trying to pump blood from your feet, for instance, it's not going to trickle down because there's low blood pressure. It keeps it going in one direction. The last of the blood vessels are called capillaries, and these make up the vast majority of your blood vessels. I think it's, if you join all your capillaries end to end, they go around the world. Very, very, very small. And they are the blood vessel that are between the arteries and the veins. They're only 1 cell thick in terms of the wall, and that's really important because it allows diffusion to happen across it very easily. And they're also under very low blood pressure because there's so many of them. So one artery will split down into thousands and thousands of these small capillaries. So if we could pause the video now, and if we could add information about the 3 blood vessels to our revision notes. Okay, so we're going to move on. And in the last one, we're looking at the blood. Now, there are 4 main parts to the blood, and you can see on the picture how much there is of each of those different sections. Blood is considered a tissue because it contains similar type cells carrying out a function. Now, the main part of the blood is plasma, makes up about 55% of the blood, and it is a pale yellow fluid. So it's very important that we have this plasma because if it was just cells, they wouldn't be able to move around. They carry carbon dioxide, they will carry dissolved substances like glucose, and they carry things like hormones and also waste products such as carbon dioxide. The next biggest component of the blood is the red blood cells, which are sometimes referred to as erythrocytes. Now, red blood cells are one of the specialized cells that we should know about. They do not have a nucleus, that is their adaptation, so it means that they're able to carry more oxygen inside them. Red blood cells contain a pigment called hemoglobin, which attracts carbon dioxide, attracts oxygen, O2. Now, when oxygen and hemoglobin come together, it forms oxyhemoglobin, which is that red colour that we know so well as blood being. It's the same because hemoglobin contains iron, it's very similar to rust. Now, red blood cells also have an adaptation that they've got that special shape, which means that they've got a large surface area again, which means that oxygen can diffuse very quickly into the red blood cells. The next biggest component is going to be white blood cells. And they're really important, as we've covered in previous lessons, in the immune system. Some of them will engulf pathogens through phagocytosis. Some of them produce antibodies, and also, which isn't on the sentence, also antitoxins. Another part of the blood is platelets, and they're just tiny fragments of old cells. They don't contain nuclei, but what they do is they're able to clump together. So if you cut yourself or damage one of your blood vessels, they clump together at the damaged area and they clot. So that stops you bleeding internally and also losing blood, lots of blood if it's an external cut. So if we could pause the video now, and if we could add information about the 4 parts of the blood, I would suggest a diagram of the test tube showing the different amounts and just a sentence about each one, what its role is in the blood. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next bit. We're moving away from kind of structures and looking at coronary heart disease. Now, coronary heart disease is caused by atherosclerosis. You do not need to know atherosclerosis as part of the specification, but be aware that atherosclerosis is that build-up of the fatty material. So atherosclerosis is a cause of coronary heart disease. It's where you have the building up of layers of fatty material inside the coronary arteries. Now, the reason why that's a really big problem is it narrows them, so less blood can flow through them. That means less oxygen and glucose is getting to the heart muscle, so it can cause heart attacks and issues with the heart. If you smoke, if you have a very fatty diet with high cholesterol, you don't exercise enough, all of those will increase your chance of having these fatty build-ups and coronary heart disease. So if we could pause the video now, can we add about coronary heart disease, what causes it, so the build-up of the layers of the fatty material, what that causes, and some of the risk factors associated with coronary heart disease. Okay, next one. So now we're looking at how we can treat atherosclerosis or coronary heart disease. And there's two that we need to know. One of them is if you have coronary heart disease. The other one is more of a preventative treatment. So the one, if you have got a blocked artery, is using a device called a stent. And they're little metal cylindrical grids that go into the artery, into that coronary artery, and then a little balloon blows it up, and then they stay in place, holding open the coronary artery. And that increases the amount of blood that can pass through it, so there's enough oxygen going to your heart. Statins are a drug. So it's a pill that you would take daily, and what they do is they lower the harmful cholesterol in the blood. Now, that means that you're going to reduce your chance of getting that atherosclerosis, that fatty buildup, and therefore reduce your chance of having coronary heart disease. Quite often, if you go and have your cholesterol checked, where they take a blood sample, if you have got high cholesterol, then you might be recommended to start taking statins. So these are the two ways in which we can treat coronary heart disease. So if you could pause the video now and put about stents and statins. Next bit is looking at faulty valves. So another big problem in medicine, or that people face, is faulty valves that aren't working properly. Now, we know that valves are there to make sure that blood flows in one direction. So if you have got a faulty valve, it means that blood can go the wrong way, and that obviously causes issues in terms of blood getting mixed up, not enough oxygen and glucose getting to all the parts of your heart, of your body. Now, symptoms for faulty valves includes a shortness of breath, swelling in the ankles and feet, and feeling unusually tired. And there's lots of causes of faulty valves. So it can just be a congenital heart disease, so that's people that are born with it. Having things like rheumatic fever can trigger it. Having cardiomyopathy, so that's a disease that affects the muscles in the heart. If you have damage to the heart muscle from a heart attack, that can cause damage to the valves. Is unfortunately one of the things that happens as you get older, and also things like bacterial infections can break away those valves and cause issues. Now, the two ways in which we can treat faulty valves, both of which involve replacing them, is using either biological valve replacements or mechanical valve replacements. So biological ones come from living organisms, tend to be pigs. And mechanical ones are made by humans, will normally have an unreactive metal and plastics and things like that. So can we pause the video now and put about how we treat faulty valves? Okay, so the next bit is looking at heart failure. So what happens when you can't treat it and the heart is failing? It's not doing its job as it should be. Now there's two ways in which we treat this. One of them is the preferred one. One of them is kind of what we use just to make sure the person survives long enough to have the first one. Now, the best way of treating heart failure is having a heart transplant. Quite often, you'll have a heart and lung transplant because it makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to make all those connections just to transplant both the heart and the lungs. Now, obviously, that will come from a donor. So that is somebody who has died and been identified as being a good candidate for replacement, because you've got to make sure that the antigens on the outside of the cells are similar to your own ones so that your body doesn't attack it. Now, there's only a few hour window, only a few hours that you can actually successfully transplant that organ. So it all has to happen very, very quickly. In this country, you have to give consent for your organs to be donated. That sentence is wrong because only very recently, literally in the last few weeks, it's changed. So it used to be that you would carry a donor card or sign up to the donor register to give permission for your organs to be donated. Now, however, it is presumed that you want to donate, but if you don't, you then have to go onto the register and say you don't want your organs donated. Now, atherosclerosis, the death of the tissue, the heart muscle tissue, which is cardiomyopathy, and congenital heart disease, these are the causes of why you would have heart failure and need to have that transplant. Because it's very hard to match people up to donated organs, and because you only have that few hours windows, it's very hard to match it up and get the right person for the donor. So sometimes in extreme circumstances, people will have an artificial heart, as you can see in the picture, just to give enough time to find a successful donor. Now, they're only used in the short term. You can't live prolonged periods of time with an artificial heart because it's just not as efficient as a biological heart would be. So they're only used to keep that person going long enough to have the transplant. So can we pause the video now, please, and put in our revision notes about heart failure, which is treated by transplants. Okay, so that is it in terms of the revision. So hopefully we have got a nice set of revision notes covering the next bit of animal tissue, organs and organ systems. So we're now going to go into some questions. Can you cover up your revision notes or put them to the side so that you can't see them as we're answering these questions? Okay. So I'm going to run through the questions. Please pause after I've read each question to give yourself the time that you need to answer the question. So the first one, we have got structures A to H shown on the diagram. Can you try and name each of those structures? So what is each of those structures? Try and do as many as you can remember. Right, and moving on to the next question. So if you'd like to pause to complete that, then please do. Question 2. What is a double circulatory system? Question 3, what is a pacemaker? Question 4, what is the role of the coronary arteries? Question 5, where does the left atrium pump blood to? And 6, name parts A to E of the lung from the diagram. So if you could pause the video and answer those questions, please. Right, moving on to the next set of questions. Question 7. Where does gas exchange take place in the lungs? Question 8. Name the gas that moves from the blood into the lungs. Question 9. Name the blood vessels that carry blood away from the heart. Question 10. Which blood vessels are only 1 cell thick? Question 11. Which blood vessels have thick muscular walls? Question 12. Which blood vessels have valves? Question 13. What is plasma? Question 14. What is the role of a red blood cell? Question 15. In what 2 ways can white blood cells fight infection? And question 16. What is the role of platelets? So if you could pause the video and make sure you've had a go at answering all of those questions. Right, and the last section of questions. Question 17, what is coronary heart disease? Question 18, what are the risk factors for coronary heart disease? Question 19, what is a stent? Question 20, what are statins? Question 21, what is the role of heart valves? Question 22, give 2 faults that can occur with heart valves. Question 13, what treatment can be given to a person with faulty heart valves? Question 24, name 3 conditions that can lead to heart failure. So we're going to go over the answers now. So make sure that you have answered all of those questions as best you can, and mark as we go along. As I said in the previous one, if you are getting any of the questions wrong, you need to go back to your revision notes or your mind map or cards and make sure that that information is added to it. Right, so we started with a question about the structure of the heart. So A, the blood vessel, is the vena cava. So that brings blood from the body to the heart. B is the right atrium. C is the right ventricle. D is the aorta. E is the pulmonary artery. F is the pulmonary veins. G is the left atrium. And H is the left ventricle. Moving on. Question 2, what is a double circulatory system? That's where the blood from the heart is pumped to the lungs and the body. So anything to do with half of the heart pumping to the lungs, half of it pumping to the body would be correct. Number 3, what is a pacemaker? It's that group of cells that controls the heart rate. Question 4, what is the role of coronary arteries? They supply oxygenated blood to the heart muscle. Question 5, where does the left atrium pump blood to? It goes to the left ventricle. It always goes from the atria to the ventricles. And 6, A to E of the lung diagram. A is the trachea, B is a lung, C is the diaphragm, D are the bronchioles, and E is a bronchus. Right, next lot. Number 7, where does gas exchange take place? It happens in the alveoli. Number 8, name the gas that moves from the blood into the lungs. That would be carbon dioxide. Number 9, the blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart are arteries. Number 10, the blood vessel that is only 1 cell thick are capillaries. Number 11, the blood vessel with thick muscular walls are arteries. Number 12, the blood vessels with valves are veins. Number 13, what is plasma? It's a pale yellow fluid. If you said that it transports cells or carbon dioxide, hormones and waste, great, but it's that pale yellow fluid. Number 14, what is the role of the red blood cell? Carries oxygen. Number 15, 2 ways in which white blood cells fight infection. So we've got phagocytosis, or engulfing the pathogens, producing antibodies. You also could have said about producing antitoxins. Number 16, what do the platelets do? They form clots. The last section, number 17, what is coronary heart disease? Anything about layers of fatty material building up on coronary arteries. Number 18, what are the risk factors for coronary heart disease? Smoking, high blood pressure, poor diet or high cholesterol, and not enough exercise. 19, what is a stent? So it's a metal cylinder that's put into the artery to open it up. Number 20, what are statins? They're drugs that reduce cholesterol. 21, what is the role of the heart valves to stop blood going in the wrong direction or stop backflow of blood? 22, 2 faults. They might not open fully or can leak. 23, treatment for faulty valves. So you've got biological or mechanical heart valve replacements. So anything to do with replacing heart valves. And 24, name 3 conditions that can lead to heart failure: atherosclerosis or coronary heart disease, either one, cardiomyopathy, and congenital heart disease, or you're born with it. So that is the end of the second part of revision for organisation. We have 2 more to go, and then we will be doing some past paper questions on organisation. So thank you very much for taking part. I hope you found it useful, and we're adding to stuff that is going to be useful to you in year 11 and reduce any stress before your exams. Have a lovely day, and you'll hear from me tomorrow for our last lesson. Thank you very much, and goodbye.